to the second panelist, Dr. Nirvikar Singh, who I have the honor and the privilege of introducing and meeting yet again at this conference. Dr. Nirvikar Singh is Distinguished Professor of Economics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where he held the Sarbjit Singh Arora Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Studies from 2010 to 2020. His research includes economic theory, development economics, political economy, and an award-winning book on Indian Americans. He has written on several aspects of Punjab's economy and serves on the Chief Minister's expert group on revitalizing the Punjab economy. In Sikh Studies, his work includes essays on Sikh identity, history, entrepreneurship, art, literature, and on translating the Guru Granth Sahib. And presenting today, Dr. Nirvikar Singh is presenting his paper, Asymmetries of Power in Knowledge Production, the Case of Sikh Studies. It's an absolute pleasure to get the chance to learn from you yet again. I'll hand over the electronic podium to you, Dr. Nirvikar Singh.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's so nice to be able to participate in today's conference, and well, this is really just wonderful. And the best part of presenting actually is for the first time I'm able to see who's listening. That's been one of the disadvantages of the webinar format is, you know, I haven't, aside from not seeing faces, I haven't even been able to see who's attending. So I was glad to see some familiar names in the participant list, and let me just say hello to everyone and hope you're doing well. It's been a really challenging year, and I hope you're all surviving and even thriving. It's nice to be included in the conference. I think I was going to be the last speaker, but circumstances have bumped me up by one position. And sometimes I think it's because the organizers or my colleagues in Sikh Studies don't quite know what to do with me, and you know, as a participant in Sikh Studies. But maybe I can just appeal to fluidity and say that you know, I'm not always an economist. So and I also want to thank the organizers in general. It's been a really wonderful, stimulating conference, and a lot of you know, the panel yesterday was great. Some very impressive presentations by young scholars, and I know there's many scholars who haven't presented this time. So the field really is in good shape. And you may be surprised to hear me say that, because I think I'm normally known as kibitzing rather than the opposite. But so I've learned a lot from the conference, and I was also glad to see that some of the themes I'm going to touch on came up in earlier sessions, often actually you know, verbalized in ways that are more sophisticated than I can manage. Okay, so you've all seen this quote many times. I'm sure it pops up all over. The exercise of power perpetually creates knowledge, and conversely, knowledge constantly induces the effects of power. And in some sense, this is my theme, and I'm going to illustrate it with some examples, some specific examples in Sikh Studies, as the title of my paper says. I'm not necessarily following Foucault, though, exactly, because when I talk about knowledge, I sometimes want to put it in inverted commas. So I'm actually, and I don't know if, I doubt if Foucault would agree with this, I want to distinguish somewhat sharply between knowledge with inverted commas and knowledge without inverted commas. And I realize that, you know, that it's difficult to draw a really bright line between the two, but I think there is a distinction, and it's our job as academics to you know, make that draw that line as best we can. This issue of categorization actually made me think of, and also identities made me think of fuzzy set theory. So I was going to joke that you know, my ambition is to write a paper on Sikh history as a stochastic process using fuzzy set theory, but that's not going to be today. So okay, so I'm not necessarily you know, following Foucault exactly, and all I want to say is that we should look at some of the you know uh, knowledge base that we have in the field. And if I could use a metaphor, a Sikh metaphor, I'm mostly going to be very Western. I'm trying to adopt the position of an objective outsider. I realize again that that's that has its own problems. That even that claim. And I'm doing it because I think that in order to engage with some of this material and some of the presentations that I'm going to, or the ideas that I'm going to address, I think one has to deal with the West on its own terms, which is a little different from some of the other perspectives we've had. In any case, my Sikh metaphor is that rather than contributing to the building of a wonderful edifice, which I think all of you are doing, I'm doing a little bit of kar seva and helping to clean out the sarovar. So I hope you'll take my contribution in that spirit. Okay, so my 5 examples, and they're really heterogeneous. Guru Nanak and the Sants, I think that's the one I've worked on the most and is for me the clearest. The impact of the Singh Sabha, which in some sense has come to dominate our perspectives in Sikh studies, especially in the West. And then I think there are some sharp things to be said there. And the remaining 3 are a little more amorphous, and I'll try not to overstate my claims there. The nature of diversity in Sikhism, and you can see I'm using Sikhism. I'm not going to be very, again, hard and fast about Sikhi versus Sikhism and so on, because also I feel like, why should I, as a Sikh, be precluded from using Western terms? And so I'm inspired by Humpty Dumpty and Alice in Wonderland there. So the nature of diversity in Sikhism, the impact of colonialism, and the Sikh diaspora. And as I go through these, I'll have less and less to say as I go down this list. So anyway, I'm going to oversimplify. I've got a very long paper. I've sent it to hopefully most of you, sometimes multiple times. If anybody wants the paper, please just write to me, or I'll be happy to share it. I'm really welcoming of criticism. Somebody already shared my paper with Robin Cohen, who I critique right at the beginning of my paper. And he immediately sent me a very nice email saying, tell me what I said wrong. And I told him it'll take me a few days he said, take a few moments. I said, it'll take me a few days. So I was really pleased with that, after nobody having brought attention to his mistakes for 20 years, as soon as somebody did, he responded immediately. Okay, so this is the one I think should be the easiest actually to accept. They claim that Guru Nanak is a member of the Sant tradition. And I'm not going to go into the details of the intellectual genealogy of this, but it's pretty clear that the Sant tradition is a 19th century construct. And really, if you read the literature by Western scholars, it's conceptually and empirically very, very fragile. And something that the Western scholars don't seem to want to acknowledge is that it's not at all a neutral idea, the Sant tradition. And really, it has its roots in a project of Hindu nationalism, not the Hindutva of Golwalkar and so on, Savarkar, but still very much that general project of cultural nationalism. And yet Western scholars treat it as if it's, oh, this is a neutral scholarly term. And so I think it's really problematic. And I think if one rejects the Sant tradition, then of course Guru Nanak was not a Sant. But I think there's a very, very easy case to make that even if you want to call something a Sant tradition, that Guru Nanak doesn't fit into it. And I've written a whole paper on it. I've kind of rehashed that paper a couple of times already. So please look at the details, and I hope I'll convince some of you at least. Okay, so this is the this is the one that is always the most contentious, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but really the popular academic narrative here is oversimplified and distorted. I think it mischaracterizes the process that occurred during the Singh Sabha. as well as not really properly understanding and describing what came before the Singh Sabha or what came after the Singh Sabha. It's sort of like this, everything is Singh Sabha and before and after, and it's actually, I guess this is going to be recorded, so it's almost as bad as saying it in writing, but it's really a terrible analysis, the popular academic narrative. And when I've talked about this to other scholars, they've said, well, but then you have to come up with an alternative. So I've started to do that in this paper. And really a more nuanced and accurate narrative of reform and evolution is not difficult to craft. And really it should have been done by now. You can see little bits of it in some of the book reviews that came out after this thesis was originally proposed in its popular form. I've quoted a little bit of Nikki Singh's review, and then there's a whole essay by Jagtar Singh Grewal on this, and there's a lot more one can say. So really, I think we need to move beyond this because, in some sense, it's really, I think, held back the field of Sikh studies, and really has created, I think, a gap between the academic field and the community, which has a very different understanding of itself. Okay, we can come back to this later. So now I'm getting into fuzzier and broader issues. So these are not quite as clear cut, but I would argue that the treatment of diversity in Sikhism in Western academia is often empirically weak. By that I mean that often what you get is a laundry list of categories without really any clear discussion or systematic analysis of what these categories mean and how they're related to each other and so on. And again, I'm just an economist, but Jagtar Singh Grewal says exactly the same thing. And he tends to say it very, very sort of plainly in a few sentences, and so people don't realize what a strong statement he's making. So there's no flowery language or anything, but really, one can make a very detailed case that the typical treatment of diversity is really not very well done. I should say that I think after I'd written the paper and circulated it, I kept on sort of looking at stuff, and I came across a nice paper by Jasjeet Singh at Leeds on diversity among Khalsa Sikhs in the UK, and I thought that was a really at least from a social scientist perspective, was a good model of how to do things systematically. Maybe everybody won't agree with me, but for me that was very useful. So the other issue here with the nature of diversity and how it's treated is that normative judgments are often made without transparency. So what happens is that scholars take sides, and these are issues, the question of, what is the proper locus of diversity within the Sikh tradition. This has been debated since, Guru Nanak, the succession to Guru Nanak, and it's debated now, and there's, multiple, ways in which that diversity gets expressed and contested and so on. But if we are going to take sides, then I think we have to be a little more transparent about it. And here, actually, it's funny because we often worry about Hindutva and RSS and so on, but often what I see here is Western scholars really trying to look good to, or Western scholars of Sikh studies trying to look good to their liberal colleagues, and sort of saying, yeah, all diversity is good, and we just love everybody, and everything is great. And I think it's more complicated than that. So anyway, I don't think I have any special expertise to decide, for example, who is a Sikh or who is a good Sikh and so on. But I think scholars sometimes slip into that, issue, and I've given some examples in the paper. So anyway, so here the power asymmetries really come from, I think, from both from outside academia and also how Western academia organizes itself. And again, I think I'll have to expand this paper into a book, which I don't know if I'll ever have the stamina to do that. But you know, there's a lot of complicated methodological issues here as well as empirical issues. Okay, moving on, the impact of colonialism. This is sort of the other bookend of the argument that the Singh Sabha were aggressive usurpers, or the Tat Khalsa were aggressive usurpers. And this sort of, I think there's a problem with the whole post-colonial literature. I'm not the only one who's saying it now, I think, and where it gives over, in some sense, gives too much power to the colonialists. And really, I think the characterization of Sikhs as, you know, somehow victims of colonialism is problematic. And I think also just the binary between, you know, Sikhs and the British often gets you know, over focused on. And of course, the full context is more complicated because you do have, you know, other communities in the Punjab in particular. And of course, the role of the Arya Samaj is very, very important in this story. And of course, the Arya Samaj in Punjab in the 1870s is, you know, another strand which later meets up with the Hindutva of Savarkar. So, you know, I think looking at it from that perspective is useful. At the same time, I don't think it's necessary to kind of characterize the Sikh response even to the Arya Samaj. And, you know, I'm thinking of them, you know, ritually shaving the heads of Sikhs and converting them to Hinduism, you know, which was to the Arya Samaj version of Hinduism, which was a, you know, big deal at that time, of course. I don't think one necessarily has to think of the response as, you know, as somehow, you know, traumatizing the community. One can equally think of the Sikh responses as being, you know, positive and strategic. And of course, there's a lot of debate and argument, and sometimes it's very bad-tempered. But you know, again, I think you know, sometimes scholars end up kind of projecting a little onto the community at that time. And some of the problem is we don't read enough of the original sources and sufficient breadth of the original sources in Punjabi. And you know, that's of course something that requires another PhD dissertation or 2 or 3 or more. So it's not something I've attempted here, but I just want to highlight this. Okay, the final topic, this is, you know, the broadest of all. And all I want to say here is that some treatments of the Sikh diaspora foreshorten or ignore Sikh history. And this is, you know, there's certainly lots of exceptions to this. I think this is a reflection of some of the history of the field that was discussed yesterday, that, you know, 1984 kind of created this sort of, you know, the Sikhs became you know, a hot topic for scholars. And so, you know, there's this sort of, there's a market, right, of ideas in academia, you know, whether we like it or not. And so this, you know, the Sikhs with 1984 became much more marketable, and, you know, fitting into, you know, broader concerns about, you know, terrorism and religious nationalism and so on and so on. Anyway, you know, sometimes, I mean, 1984 has been hugely important, and events around that have been important. You know, my wife and I were in Delhi, and, you know, we thought we were going to die on, you know, November 1st. So I can't say it's unimportant, and you know, for many Sikhs it was much worse. But I think, you know, in the bigger picture of Sikh history, it often gets, you know, scholars who came into the field relatively sort of, you know, jumped in at this stage, sometimes don't really pay enough attention to, you know, the whole arc of Sikh history. And that shouldn't be a controversial thing. There's also this issue of, you know, Punjabi versus Sikh, and I have some examples in the paper where Punjabi gets foregrounded as the group label, and sometimes that hides certain issues which, you know, are, I think, unique to Punjabi Sikhs. And, you know, again, you know, we've discussed the overlaps and differences between the two categories. And, you know, certainly sometimes members of the Sikh community prefer the term Punjabi, and that's absolutely fine. That's everybody's right to, you know, choose what they want to kind of be labeled as. It's very interesting, though, that I think in the US Census now, for the first time, we had the category Sikh, and we'll see where that goes. So I think this is a political choice, but I think it should be the community's choice and not something that is determined by Western scholars, again, who are kind of interpreting the community, interpreting us for ourselves. And again, that's sort of the power move that I have an issue with. Okay, so I want to say that, I really tried hard to make this about, certain arguments and not about people, because that's been a problem in the field where, things get personalized, and it actually inhibits discussion. And I think, I've seen in this conference, I think we're getting away from that. And certainly this paper is not about defending tradition, or necessarily traditional accounts, or defending power asymmetries within the community. They're there. And again, I'm not going to take sides. I just want to say that there's this other stuff going on. And certainly I'm not promoting exclusion or any exclusionary approach in scholarship. I think we have to do this together. So it is about promoting rigor, about being conceptually rigorous as well as empirically rigorous. However you want to mix those two, and where the role of interpretation is, we can differ on that. And I think we have to do that in the face of multiple sources of power, which really affect us as a community. And I've actually been recently involved in a project, I won't go into detail, where people from outside the community basically took charge. And when I complained, then somebody else from the community would be designated as a surrogate to attack me. And to me, that's the illustrates the problem of Sikh Studies, where we're supposed to fight among ourselves while somebody else kind of just looks on. Sorry, that sounds a little bit too whiny, so don't worry too much about it. But in terms of this issue of anti-intellectualism and distance from the community, let me finish with something which is not in the paper. And that's that actually, and this is something I've really realized over the last year, and it's some of the terrible things that have happened in this country, plus the pandemic, locking me in the house to watch lots of cable news. I see African American academics really engaging very, very productively with the concerns of the African American community. And we talked about some of this in the panel yesterday, about activism and scholarship, and actually this morning too, or maybe early afternoon, where we are sort of engaging with the community and their sort of social concerns, and I think that's really where we should be, figuring out how to do that, and without sort of getting into this intellectual versus anti-intellectual binary, which I don't think we need to at all. So I actually wasn't looking at a clock, but I think I'd better stop here. And otherwise, I'll go on, and maybe we'll have time in Q&A. Thank you. Thank you, and Chardi Kala.
Thank you so much. And that's actually a perfect 20 minutes. So we moved